We do workshops on design thinking, ethical innovation, ecosystem building, and other topics. And we do co-working. So this space that you're in is a co-working space, and we've got about 100 co-working members. If you're interested in joining, you can talk to me afterwards and I can hook you up with some information. We usually have some co-working members also here in the space, but I'm not seeing anybody at the moment. But anyway, that takes care of Schoolab. Thank you. We really are excited to have all of you here tonight, and I'm going to hand it over to Ron Martinez.
First thing I have to try to say is that I woke up with laryngitis, and so this is a particularly horrific form of karmic retribution for something. I'm not sure what I did, but I got it. It's like one of those nightmares. But thank you all for coming. We're very excited to have our guests this evening. I had a big presentation full of fascinating gems. You're not going to hear any of them because I can barely talk. They probably weren't that good. So we are Reinventing Storytelling. My name is Ron Martinez. My company is headcanon.com. Please go there and get on our mailing list so we can keep you apprised of future events and, send you discount codes from Walter. Just kidding about that. Here's our hashtag, Restory, in case you tweet out, so we'll be looking for that. Schoolab's account, why don't you guys say yours, handle, and there's headcanon.com. Coming up in January, our focus will be design fiction, which is the discipline of spinning up worlds in the service of design of products, services, companies. It's a really interesting and emerging field. And then in February, narrative marketing, which we'll talk about later on in the year. And really, this is the focus for this series. Our last one was on voice. The question is, how can storytelling evolve when platforms evolve to take advantage of the unique characteristics of those platforms to deliver compelling narratives? And certainly our speakers for tonight know a lot about this, having pioneered, as I've said many times over the last month, legendary game experience designers, and they are that. So we're very honored to have them here tonight. David Fox, and I'll let each of David and Nicole describe their own experiences in fact. And Nicole Lazzaro. So with that, I want to thank you for coming and turn it over to Nicole, who will start our event.
Appreciate all of the interest in something that's really near and dear to my heart, which is telling stories, on new platforms, and more importantly, as we'll get to see, getting us into a developing new techniques to move us all emotional. So, as Ron said, I'm Nicole Lazzaro. I'm a thought leader in the game industry and the immersive industry. Among other things, I designed the first iPhone game. I measured emotion on people's faces while they played, which resulted in the 4 keys to fun, which is used in everything from the AI to the Sims to inspiring IBM sentiment analysis. And it's a way of creating emotion from game mechanics. So we've added life to the Sims. We've added Wonder to Myst. I worked on 3 of the Myst games. And really make you feel the Force, in some Star Wars titles. As well as we've done some very deep work on UIs and UXs for experiential spaces. So this is the Google's hands-free iFluence. So it created a UI, AR and VR UI, where you can actually do things in productivity stuff in the world. And so these are some of our XR clients. We've worked with a lot of the leading platforms and developers, creating more immersive, more interesting, more emotional experiences, as well as I've given a number of workshops and lectures like you're having here around the world in different platforms, different places. And this is the 4 Keys to Fun, so it's been everything from, I've done a couple of play shops over in Singapore, and I was on Samantha Bee, and I helped her with her This Is Not a Game a couple years ago, making more stuff. So, and then I've also advised the White House and the State Department a couple times on how to use mechanics to make the process of governing more active citizens, as well as some interesting things that we're all kind of living through right now, unfortunately. So, with that all said, let's get into what we wanted to talk about. What is story? Actually, I just wanted to see what do people think of when they think of story? What is a story? Any things? Yeah, Mark?
Instagram, 1.7 billion a day.
Okay, we have Instagram. What else is a story? So, story, I was saying earlier, someone was talking about it's an experience that you share. So, stories are things that you share. Another thing would be like the story might also be what we read. It's the connective tissue to make different points, different facts, different ideas connect together. It's a really interesting variety of what stories can be. But in Pixar's world, which is they're very expert storytellers, they talk about 3 things. They talk about characters, they talk about story, and they talk about the world. So they should be believable and memorable and move you emotionally. And we have techniques like that and 3-act structures to move us emotionally, and that's how we talk about stories. We think about stories from the traditional disciplines of film and books and dramas. But you ever wonder why? Like why a character, why a world, why a story? These are the sort of hooks that pull you into an emotional experience. These are the things, these are the archetypes, these are the aspects that are going to pull you into a place that's not where you're sitting right now, here listening to me. And immersive storytelling does this pulling into quite a bit more. So that's why I'm super excited to explore it with all of you today. Because immersive storytelling is going to pull you, if it's done well, when it's done well, we're still learning, getting our feet wet, stumbling quite a bit. But it pulls people deeper into the story, character's world, and the immersive qualities of it, and it offers more agency. So to be immersive and not an agent is, it's basically immersive with one hand tied behind its back. And then it creates more emotions than, more traditional media, because you're just so surrounded, you're just so much more deep in the experience than you were being otherwise. And so if we look at what are the immersive techniques for storytelling, these are kind of my 3 golden rules, if you will. Is what I'm doing these things? These are the quality tests that I run my experiences through. Because in my book with storytelling, it is all about, and again I come from games, it's all about the emotion. So I have a degree from Stanford in psychology, cognitive psychology, and as I said, I measured emotions using Pollock and spatial action coding to come up with the 4 keys. And it is the moment-to-moment gameplay, how it created emotion, how pushing a plastic button for 40 hours creates an amazing sequence of emotions. So that's where I'm coming from. And regardless of whether you're in linear and 2D media or immersive and 3D media, it's this emotion, that's the holy grail, because that's where we're really touching people. If we don't create, if our experiences don't create emotion, and believe me, gamers are emotional, even though if you're just sitting there sort of like, this, as they're playing. So if storytelling's holy grail really is emotion, so we're going to dive into a little bit more about these techniques. So this is the 4 keys. I have plenty of video on the web. You can look at it. You can also download the white paper for 4k2f.com. It's free. The idea is that the actions in the center, the player experience, if you will, creates different emotional responses. So there's the easy fun of just fooling around, driving the racetrack backwards, curiosity, wonder, surprise. The hard fun of challenge and mastery. Dribbling basketball is fun, but you really want that extra, like, okay, I've got to get into that hoop, that challenge. You're playing pool and you want to bounce it off the bumpers in order to get in. That makes it a different kind of fun. Different emotions. The feeling you can't push a button and save the princess, right? You can't push a button to win Grand Prix. Then we also noticed, we were talking earlier today about sharing. So the idea of having these people fun, the 3rd key, which is all about the social interaction around the media, is creating a lot of emotion as well. So we think of, from traditional media, whether you're writing a book, or whether you're an animator, or whether you're doing movies or something, you really are used to having go from almost a solitary authorial experience into perhaps a solitary experience, viewer experience or audience experience. But immersive at its best just like games at its best, is going to be when it's social and highly interactive, because there are more emotions in the third key people found than the other three keys combined. So that's important to know. And then lastly, we have serious fun. Serious fun is all about playing a game to change how I think and feel and behave. So changing the real world around me, or changing, so I'm getting smarter, I'm getting more relaxed, I'm learning something. Earning badges is a very simple thing. There's a lot more deep things that are going on. I built an Intel 386 processor in Minecraft. That kind of thing is the ability. Or that I just put I created a YouTube video of me playing Minecraft, and I shared it with my friends, and I get 2, right? It was kind of hard to do, so I also get the hard fun. So we go through these loops. And it doesn't have anything to do with a 3x structure unless you think of this 3x structure as a loop, in that you've got the beginning, the middle, the rising action, the climax, and then the denouement, and then you're going right back to the beginning again and doing this again. So if you can helically attach, go through a 3x structure through each of these, that might work. That might work. Regardless, what we're doing right now is we're taking this experience and putting it into our own engine. So Z is creating its own emotion engine, narrative AI, based on a lot of these principles that we talked about today. So the last thing I want to do as intro is that it's important to remember that when we're talking about immersive, the unique quality, again, this is kind of a nice rule of thumb, is that we're talking about depth. So if you, regardless of what kind of an artist you are, you've always had 3 crayons in your box, so red, green, and blue, right? And you can make animation, create movies, all sorts of stuff with those 3 colors. Well, along comes immersive, and then now what do I have now? I've got a 4th crayon, and it's depth, right? It's the Unity Z axis. It's the one that's going into the screen. And if I'm not using that as a creator in every layer of my experience, then it really isn't immersive. So if I'm sitting in a 360 bubble video and there's no depth to it, it's just all around me, that's kind of immersive, but it's not really gonna pull me in as much as a stereoscopic, I can now see some depth, and then even better, I can actually walk to it, or I can have stuff come to me. That's a lot more immersive, a thing. So it's not so much the hardware, but it's that, is it using depth? That's the key. And it's really all more and so because we're using space, it's spatial computing, right? Then we're often more like an architect than a filmmaker, or kind of a hybrid between the two. Because you've got a sort of a more narrative structure with a film director, and then perhaps a more spatial perspective if you're the architect. So how do we, so we're going to do 3 things. We're going to talk about, so we're going to talk about depth, we're going to talk about agency, and we're going to talk about emotion. And we just have a really brief time. I can have you stay for questions afterwards, but we're going to go through this pretty quickly. So immersive depth is all about emotion through action. So, storytelling in a sense isn't the only way to create emotion in interactive media. So not just the beginning, middle, and end. People experience emotion whether you plan them or not in these interactive experiences, so we want to basically be able to, the important thing is to be intentional. So with All the White Rabbit, what we did is an early case study for creating, increasing immersion in spaces, was to create what we call a narrative space. And so that there can be explicit stories, beginning, middle, and end, running through something. But you can also have you can also balance the agency by being able to move through this space and experience different emotions simply by turning. So for example, in this Paris Cafe, as you turn around, this is sort of a stretched view of it, you have different experiences and different emotions as you simply rotate through the space. And then as you interact, and then as you make choices, that space changes, the emotional tenor, the emotions that you feel also change as you move through these different beats, if you will. But they're interactive beats, not necessarily story beats. Over top of that, we of course are layering character and actual plot points and that sort of things on top. But we wanted to make sure that even without the more traditional narrative tools, that the space itself is very evocative. And it just made you want to go through it. If you've ever been on a dark ride at Disneyland, for example, or if you've ever been, really good escape rooms can do this now, they're starting to get better. But that you're just turning from wonder to, laughter to maybe a little scary. And then that narrative arc, the sequencing of emotions is all controlled by me, not the user, the player, right? Not the author. And for this, just like my very first, and I go way back, Just like my first, I've been working at Zio for the past 27 years. And my first experiences were all on HyperCard, and we would not use arrows. We would not have any buttons with arrows on it. That was just forbidden. You have to like figure out how to not get through this without just doing a page turn. The same thing here, I take for this stuff too, is that, you know, if I have to like put a carrot and then force you to look one way or another way, then I've really broken that relationship with you as having agency, to explore the world yourself. And then as you get more into the world, your interaction changes the world, and I think that's also important for increasing depth. So if it is simply a world that you can explore, pick up and put down, pick up and put down, but it doesn't actually translate into something new, it doesn't actually transform, then you feel much less immersed, you know, in that space. It feels much less deep. It feels more like a cardboard cutout. Now the fun thing is that a lot of this game is actually made out of cardboard billboards, you know, but it doesn't feel cut out because, you know, you're actually able to interact with them, and somehow they are changing in some very weird, magical ways. We also want to be sure that this immersive social action, so being able to like bring other people into that space, or if it's single player, you can actually do it outside. So working on the 3 Myst games that we did, one of them was Uru, which was actually multiplayer, but the single player Myst were actually multiplayer too, because, you know, mom and kid would play this together with the kid on mom's lap, or 2 kids next to each other would sort of fight over the mouse, and they would go through it together. And so I think that we're getting, even if you don't have direct multiplayer, if your platform can't support 2 heads in one space, you can have this either asynchronous or, you know, companion Piaget parallel play happening, and that can provide some of the social, you know, juju that makes this stuff so much fun. And this get really put to the test with David and I. David Fox and I worked on this game on Scramble the Oracle. It was a Bose AR game jam. And Bose AR basically is a set of sunglasses or a headset, and there's no visuals, it's all audio. So Bose makes really great speakers or really great headsets. And so all of the audio is coming from the frame itself. So it's just a pair of sunglasses here, normal sunglasses, but I'm getting audio that's projected right into my ears. And it has an IMU, a motion sensor, and a compass. So it actually knows where I'm looking, which direction I'm looking. So up and down, left and right. And then we added, Patrick O'Shaughnessy and the Crabs also were on the team, and we added a walking detector. So you actually walk through this. So what's fun is this is a game called Unscrambled Oracle. You get to meet your chicken fairy godmother, because everyone has one. And you get to help her find her lost hubby and chicks. And it's a choose your own adventure you play walking around the block. Now what's interesting is that we wanted a narrative that you could walk through, audio driven, but it could be played in any space, because there are no cameras, you know, on this device, right? And so we wanted to be able to play, you know, just bouncing, you know, in place in your living room or at your desk, or walking around your kitchen, or really literally walking through the forest or around the city block. So we wanted that flexibility, which really pushed our narrative, you know, tools or thinking. So what and then if you, we were on stealth, so we haven't really launched it, but if you do have Android and access to a Bose headset that you bought within the past year, you should be able to play it. So that's the bit.ly for if you want to download it, the current version. So with traditional audio, I think this is important for narrative too, is that traditional audio, we often think of it, you know, coming in, so inward focused. So you put on a headset, and then you're focused, like, I'm going to be in the middle of, you know, a band. And you see a lot of even AR audio stuff that was like, okay, so now I'm in the middle of an orchestra, and it's kind of cool, because I could, you know, turn towards the timpani drums, I could turn towards the violin section. That's kind of interesting, but it's really the advantage is going to be spatial, the advantage of spatial is really when it's pointing, you know, it's pointing outward. And the idea is that if you've got traditional, kind of makes you feel like the experience is happening, you know, here in the center, whereas audio design for spatial is really, you want it to be out in the world, and we'll talk about in a moment, like how we did that. So it's not just that I want to be in a place and there's space sound happening around me, but I want to like move in my space and have that sound move in response to me. And then low and high frequencies mean psychologically different things. So we've got the low basses, the low tones tend to be low. You feel spatially lower, closer to the ground. high tones tend to be, higher frequencies tend to be higher up, and some interesting things. Like, for example, what we can't do right now, but like when I'm talking to you, when David's talking to me, I can feel his voice on my chest. If the T-Rex is coming around the corner to eat me, you know, and popular things, I should feel that on my feet. So we don't have the haptics yet, and it feels very disconnected yet, because haptics and sound and audio are really closely tied together. We did a demo for Horizons earlier this year. Dave was on the team too. And it was all about creating surface textures and directional force. So I could, like, you know, feel something like leather, the difference between like leather and steel and carpet and stuff like that inside the VR headset. So with, anyway, this is a Fairy Chicken Godmother. We had a couple of takeaways with the game audio. So again, like, what are the stories, like, how can it talk about the world? How can it describe the world that you're in and create it in a more deep way? So the position of that audio was super important. So it wasn't just a left and right. So if you think about Flatland, a lot of that stereo mix is just left and right. So it's two-dimensional audio. And you can kind of get the thing that rolls around your head a little bit in some tools. But where it really comes into power is using a more advanced spatializer so that I can get the Chicken Fairy Godmother. She's at 2 o'clock high. It works really well for a narrator. And so she's always there, you know, when we're going, and when I walk, she walks with me. Or I leave her here and I can walk away from her at points. And that's an interesting kind of story, some story moments that we have to use to tell stories and tell interaction stories, you know, a little bit later in the game. We also want a flexible layout of the real world. That's a super challenge when you're trying to design XR experiences to happen in the real world, because the real world has its own story. You know, I'm in a library, or I'm here at Schoolab, or I'm in the kitchen eating that wonderful cheese, which I want to have more of later on. You know, but the real cheese, not the virtual kind. But anyway, that flexible layout of the real world, we don't really know. So how can we tell the story? How does that impact the different layers of the story that you're trying to tell when you don't know where they're actually going? And in our case, what we did was we looked at several use cases, and we figured that, you know, well, if they are walking the forest, you know, then here are some things that would really work well with that. If they are walking around the block, then this would be a really interesting kind of design. And then buttons and interactions, which we'll talk about. It is a huge problem in audio first design. So with when we look at audio first design, we've got, when audio is leading the gameplay, you can have a narrator, but you want to show me, don't tell me. And then in immersive, we want to actually be able to experience it. Right? We want to be able to walk through it, very much like a game mechanic. Let me do it. Let me be there. Let me work through it. The game happens in the player's head, and so it's not just out there in the. You use what's out there to get inside their head to have them fill the gaps, which is what, you know, a good story is all about. And there's more interactive experiences. I'm going to move on a little bit quicker there. But then interactive spatial audio worlds. So now we've got, we want to move through the scenes with, so we'll call them audio lampposts. So this was an interesting thing. We have a couple of them. We walk through the forest, and so you have to jump over a log or dodge a tree, or walk over a river. In the castle, outside the castle, we walk through a marketplace. And so it's a very powerful thing that a world can feel much more rich as if I'm walking through it and then it moves past me. But you can't just put in like anything. Like if I'm walking here, down, up and down, all you're going to hear is my voice getting louder and softer. There's no story, there's no narrative. So it was really interesting that, you know, we had to design very iconically, so that's why we did a fairy tale. And so everybody knows what a marketplace would probably sound like. And there are lots of little lampposts we could make out of these different sound effects. And so as I walked through them, no matter how fast I was walking or how slow I was walking, I would eventually, you know, walk through them, right? And then I would get the feeling that I was in that immersive space. So that technique allowed me, kind of like stagecraft, you would walk through that space and be able to see, you know, feel those things move past you. And we had to remind players like where they were in the audio, you know, in the immersive thing, like where was it that they had chosen what kind of pathway. And so we kept the interactions really simple. because the mind was, we wanted the mind to be, wanted the mind to be elsewhere. So that's why there's just simply a walk and a tap to choose and a look around. So we really limited the amount of interaction to some basic things. And in XR, basically we divided up into like basically you're walking, or you're on a menu and then you're rotating. And if we have a lot more other things that we had to do, like a diagonal or something else, it would be very, very challenging to do. Because what we wanted is we wanted to have a lot of agency. So we wanted them to learn two things to be able to play everything. So with agency, we want this emotion through action. One game, this is my game, this was a variant of the first iPhone game. And we wanted the game, in this game, when you planted the trees, your points actually planted real trees in the real world. And so, basically games help us invent our future selves. So in terms of agency, we want to aspire, to create people's values, connect people with their values. And so with Tilt World, we have these different interactive scenes, or interactive scenes dump into these different, or themed around all these different environmental restoration sort of themes. So there's recovering from acid rain, there's reforestation, there's recovering from fires, and invasive species and stuff like that. And so it connects people a little bit more. Some stories are told, the stories are supported by player action. How many people have seen Walls on the Walls? Yeah, I've played it, yeah. It's a wonderful, I highly recommend if you're working, it's like one of the best examples right now of interactive storytelling in the XR space, for sure. It's quite a step up of their previous title, which was Henry. And with Wolves on the Walls, you help Lucy. And what's interesting is that you're really more of a companion character. So you're not the protagonist so much. But there are these really interesting moments, and we'll talk about just a couple, to increase agency that you feel like you're really being there. So for example, she gives you a camera. And so you can use that. I'm trying to spoil too much of it, but so you can use that camera in an interesting way. She might hand you a flashlight, and then that could be, an interesting kind of adding to the narrative. She also creates you at the very beginning, which is a really delightful scene. So she draws you in as, two hands, and so then you have a presence in the world. Your only presence is just your two hands, your chalk hands, and there's that sense of connection. Here she's setting you up. But then you've got the ability to interact, which is great, because without that agency, you're just watching. And with Henry, Henry was lonely, but you couldn't actually get in there and help what was happening with Henry. So with Aladdin, this is going to jump to this is the second chapter for Follow That Rabbit, and this we've done in AR. And so I wanted to look at how can we create agency, agently stories. All right. And so the techniques we found here a bit were about being, you actually are Aladdin. So it's a first-person perspective, and this is running on Magic Leap, and your hands are your real hands. And so we didn't want to use a controller because that would feel like you were actually that would put you a little bit out in terms of your agency role in terms of storytelling. You could be much more first-person if you actually used your real hands. But then you don't have a convenient thing of pushing a button to go forward or move around. So how do I know how to grab onto these things? Do I want floating buttons? If I have floating buttons, that's still like a layer of abstraction between me and what I actually want to do. So this is Aladdin's Cave of Wonders. It's where Aladdin finds the magic lamp. The idea is you go through, and I do have demos of these for later if people want. You go through the world and you have to avoid all the treasure because it's cursed until you grab the lamp, and then you have the protection of the lamp and you can gather as much treasure as you want. So the storytelling here in immersiveness is that where my body is physically in that space, and that I'm able to grab and use magic, and we found that was very compelling. But that I couldn't, as the author, I could come up with a couple of different ways or scenarios for people to go through, and I would create puzzles with specific solutions. But we don't, I want to create a space where I don't have to go to station A, then to station B, then to station C. That helps narratively, because I could draw a linear narrative between those spots, but I want it to be much more free form, where I can just explore everywhere, and I have these little delightful things to find out. So there's this interaction with the butterflies, which I'm using hand tracking provided by the platform. And then these are my magic spells, this is my craft spell type of thing. And so that the story that we're creating is much more there because I'm not just, clicking to turn the page, I'm actually, moving it forward by interacting. And it's much more powerful when you are the main character and you can directly participate in the world. It's a lot higher bar though, storytelling wise, than what we have. There's also this sort of, so these are some of the finger spells that we're working on, and this is inspired by a conversation that David and I had a while ago, is that like there's this movie, I guess there's a TV show he introduced me to called The Magicians, and so they do these finger spells, and I'm going to put the mic down, it's like, maybe, sit, stay, okay. So these finger spells are amazing because you do this kind of thing and then you send the magic off, right? And it's all of this complicated, finger touch, something like that I think it's called. And it'd be lovely to do, in a magic leap. However, and what happens, and this is across all the platforms with hand tracking now, is it's just enough to be able to get the hand much less like an actual gesture. So basically, it's a this, and a this, and a this, and a this, and that's my love spell, right? Which yeah, it's really cute. There's a love spell here. And then I make these butterflies and other things interacting with the hands to kind of make it feel a little bit more, fluid. But what we really want to do is to be able to make these, lovely gestures and be able to, make things happen magically. So it's, and all of this, there's a whole new class of interaction and XR paradigms that come out of simply, trying to use your hands in real space. We worked on Mist 5, which had tablets with gestures on it. And, even just agreeing on what a square versus a circle was, or a triangle versus this, you're just like, so even if I'm just in 2 space, it's hard. But is that a triangle? Well, it is if I'm looking down like here, but if I'm looking at here, it's just a line, right? So 3 space makes it so much more complicated. And then, this is where we're going, is that, in dark magic, when I spill dark magic all over my notebook here, we really want to have interaction with the real world for XR, right? So that storytelling, if there is, I feel disappointed if I don't find burn marks in my real world notebook when I spill, virtual dark magic. So how can we close that loop? I think that would be really cool. So virtual objects, are coming into our real world, changing the real world, and then having that come back into the virtual yet again. Those things will be very powerful, powerful storytelling moments. So we've got spatialized audio menus, and so I'm going to talk about this super quick, and then because I think we're running out of time. And but basically, the idea here was that to interact with in a menu, especially in space, if there are no visuals, we really only had about 4 or 5 buttons. You can't stack them vertically like 5 or 6. You pretty much have it forward, backward, left, and right. People couldn't. There's not the resolution in our heads right now, unless your primary sense is sound. But people who are vision first, it's very hard to get things. So that's why we did, again, dancing, walking, and then looking around. So we really wanted to limit we only present one option at a time, and there's no short-term memory. We just can't remember more than one option. So I think that I'm going to just wrap it up with a final little thing here for audio narrative, where how do we tell this audio, this story, first. So if you think about here, for the 4 keys, we can create these micro loops of gameplay. So exploration, via sort of bubble wrap sort of thing. We can create these serious fun loops and these other loops. So that all can help us create emotional experiences that can be very compelling, even if I can't guarantee a sequence. And so we want to make sure that we do that, but then in a space that's narrative, that's spatial. So in terms of immersive storytelling, we want to these are our goals. We want to pull people deeper into the world and offer more agency on what they see and do, and create more emotions as the stuff surrounds you. So that's how character and story and world are going to change in immersive tech. So thanks. That's good. Well, thank you.
trivia comment.
Oh, yeah? Let's see.
Check
Check it out.
The twin brother of the guy who wrote the Magician's book was the lead game designer at Netflix.
Oh, wow, there you go. So that's a good trivia for you.
All right, any, other comments, questions?
Other comments about story and immersive?
Hi, my name is Pavel, and I have a question. The designers of web designers is very common for now, but XR designers is hard to educate. In your opinion, how we can create more jobs in this area and how we can educate them? Because as I understand, it's very hard to design things in 3D. Okay?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that the first answer is, of course, experience. Second answer is, game jams, weekend jams, which I've done a lot of. A lot of these experiences have come from game jams. But the third one is maybe just a little bit of a story with Follow White Rabbit, for example. I do a lot of 3D prototyping. So what was fun about that, so if you remember this world that wraps around, kind of like this photo here, is that I sketched it out. And I took 4 manila file folders with paper clips and created a box. And then took my panorama of sketches or whatever and stapled them together or whatever, and then put it in as a tube inside the box. And then I, did things like stick my iPhone in it, and then looked it around, right, and record that video. And then had it, and then I put it up on the edge of the conference table, like stuck my head in it, so I could like look around that way. So being able to prototype the 3D, you can, I think there's gray box, black box, and cardboard box, stage really does help. If you want more specific examples of UX for XR, I gave a talk at AWE this past year on advanced UX and UI standards for games and enterprise. So there's a lot of really good tips there.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ali, and I'm very new into AR. And but when you mentioned something about touching, feeling like leather or metal.
Oh yeah.
I see there is a lot of opportunities there for like e-com platforms in the future. Like if I want to buy a T-shirt, I can go there, just look at it,
Right.
turn it around, and kind of touch it. From what you mentioned, I hear that you're working on feelings to improve like kind of the feeling of people.
Right.
And feeling is something that there are so many books, but it's a different experience for every person. Like I cannot, there is no book to tell you, okay, this is the feeling of love. There are so many books that are trying to express themselves about love, but the meaning of love for you or the meaning, it's different experience. I'm talking about the experience. How do you adjust that, like create the balance? Like, what is your...
Well, the work that we're doing is interaction design in service of some sort of story or narrative, and I define that as a series of emotions. And I like to provide a lot of variety of those different emotions. Where I go to is when I looked at the field, at the time when I did this research, people said, well, there's no emotions in games. Games can only produce the emotions of the stadium, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. But I knew that that was wrong because there are micro-expressions on the face. So you can read them through books and you can sample them through surveys, but what happens with humans is there are 6 emotions, actually 7, in the face that you can measure directly through they're called micro-expressions. So if you don't Lie to Me, I think was a popular TV show based on Paul Ekman, and his research is what I used. And so what we're doing is moment to moment measuring these emotions, and then that helps us test whether we're on target or off target in terms of the ability to create like a deeply resonant thing. And then when you look at a well-tuned game and they open the box and the frog jumps out, there's almost always surprise. There's almost always these things. But again, it's also still an art, not a science, and so you have to be threading these emotions. I can give many talks on emotions. One of the things is think about I thought it'd be just like popcorn. It's like, okay, we just have an emotion here, emotion there, and then we're done. That's what it was. But when we actually did research, what we found is that emotions are threaded and they're braided. They happen in sequence. Some emotions have prerequisites. And some happen, and they often happen, together. So, the feeling of like winning, yes, the hard fun, thrill of the boss monster. Basically, of beating a boss monster, you can't, basically I have to be so frustrated that I'm gonna throw my controller through the window. And if I win at that moment, that's when the arms go up and I punch the sky. And so knowing these relationships can help, create interactive narratives that are, in immersive spaces that are more compelling. We say compelling, I'm using that definition of more emotion. And I believe emotion is responsible for a couple of things. It's involved in motivation, so you feel more motivated, you feel more engaged. You're much more likely to return if you're having these emotional responses, among other things. There's a question there.
Hi, yes, I think it's really amazing how interactive and immersive this is. It's my first time seeing something so unique like this. So I'm a filmmaker, and coming from this perspective, I was wondering if in the near future we can have 3D and virtual reality without the glasses or the eyepieces. Will that be something that will one day happen?
Yeah, there definitely we're having, so the question was, are we going to get, virtual reality without the glasses, without the headsets? I think there's obviously a trend already that the headsets are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're getting, lighter and lighter and lighter. If anyone wants to know what they're going to look like, they're going to look like this, only with like some projectors that you can barely see, inside. And so then you've got that. This is definitely going to be a class of device. Eventually we'll get contacts and that sort of thing too, I suppose. But we still need the assistive devices. There are some projected screens though. So there's actually, I saw someone read something, but it was it actually had a 3D projected like cell phone screen. It was more kind of that like believe in Jesus kind of experience. It was like, oh wow, but it moved, right? So there's some video. So we will get that more. I think we're still going to need these assistive devices. However, what's interesting about them though, especially in an AR context, is that when we have a computer screen, it's great because I have blocked out I dedicated this space in my world. It's a very thin space this way, but it's definitely, I've dedicated that to the display. With AR, it can be anywhere. We can lock it to physical parts of the world, but so what is that going to do like with furniture and stuff like that? Are we all going to live in these like empty IKEA white boxes so that we can virtually decorate them? Yeah. Or do we have like the normal mode and then we go into the IKEA white box thing for when I'm in my virtual doing stuff? Yeah, I think this brings up some really interesting questions. But for me, it's like we've got this is the Oculus Go, for example. It's just get in there as a filmmaker and just try and make stuff, because it's the making of stuff that's where you're going to find your voice, you're going to find your storytelling techniques. Every one of you is super talented, and you've got these things, these ways, these things that work, and it's just an awesome opportunity to find a new expression in a new space. So we had one more question, or should we wrap up?
I can stick around and wait.
Yeah, I think we're going to, thanks Nicole, and thanks everyone for your questions so far. If there are more questions, you can ask them later in the networking. We're going to move the narrative forward a little bit now to David Fox. And I think we're going to transition to different presentation here.
And thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
So this is a talk that I've never given before, so please excuse the rustiness or if it doesn't flow smoothly, but I have a whole lot of fun putting it together because it's stuff I'm really very interested in. Can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah.
Pretty quiet.
You can put it in the back.
You can hear me in the back and off the front. Let me talk more about it. Okay. So first I want to talk about my background. I've been doing games for about 40 years. First one I did was something for Sesame Street, for a children's television workshop called Mix and Match Muppets, which ended up in the Sesame Place theme park in Philadelphia, and I think it was 1979. Then I started at Lucasfilm Games. I was employee number 3, and was there from the very beginning in 1982 for about 10 years. And did mostly graphic adventure games. Last one I did there was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And then I did my own game about 5 or 6 years ago called Rubeworks, based on Rube Goldberg's original cartoons from the 1930s and 40s, where you get to put together the devices that he had in the cartoons as a puzzle type game, kind of a casual puzzle game. And then most recently, I got together with some of my LucasArts old friends, and we did Thimbleweed Park, which was also a graphic adventure, which takes place in 1987, but from the look of 1992, but just came out a couple of years ago. So that's my background, mostly in games, game designer, project leader, programmer, and that's that. But I want to just talk a little bit about a couple of different types of immersive storytelling that are more in the location-based or out-of-home arena. One is kind of a simulator-based experience where you're in a physical cockpit. Think of flight simulator, maybe the aircraft used, the Air Force or pilots there when they first train, but taking that into an entertainment arena. I'd say in terms of public use, Star Tours at Disneyland, Disney World was probably one of the first really well-done motion basis, but it was non-interactive. It was essentially, you're on a track, it's a movie, it happens the same way every time. Battletech in the 1990s, where you're again in a machine operating like this massive robot. Mirage, which I'll talk about, which we did. And most recently, the one that's everyone's probably heard about is at Disneyland, Disney World, the Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, where it actually is interactive to some degree. Which I haven't tried yet, so I can't talk too much about that. Then there's another kind, which is kind of a theme park overlay experience, where the physical environment is the park itself. And since a theme park can be, especially Disneyland or the Universal parks, have so much detail and so rich, that the idea of putting a game on top of it, rather than trying to create a simulated game, is something that's been done. The first one I knew about was a friend of mine, John Ackley, did for Disney at Epcot around 2006, using cell phones and going around to different locations and interacting with special devices and having things happen there. There's one that I got to work on, which I'll show you more about, at Tokyo Disney Sea. And most recently, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter with a magic wand. And again, it's kind of an overlay game. There's not a whole lot of story for at least the bottom two. It became possible when it had a lot of story. And then there's location-based virtual reality. I'm not going to talk too much about that in this talk, though. There's a free roam type where you're wearing a backpack and you're in a warehouse-type space or a large space, and there are nothing physical in there except open space. And then there's, am I still here?
I'll get the other one.
Okay, so the other is VR escape rooms. Ubisoft did those, a bunch of those, where you end up with a VR experience, but you're like escape room, but it's all in VR, and it's usually multiplayer. VRs usually run about 45 to 60 minutes in length, as opposed to other types of games that tend to be maybe 10 minutes. And then there's some that are fairly recent, like The Void, and Dreamscape, Immersive, and Nomadic, where you have a physical space with objects that match, physical objects which match the virtual objects you're seeing. So if I walk up to a window, I can reach it and actually, there we go, I can reach the window and feel it.
the window.
If you see a chair, you can sit in the chair. If you see some weapon on the wall, you can pick it up and use it. So there's a one-to-one correlation with the physical universe in the room and what you see. If you lift up your headset, you'd see stuff that looked probably like really boring, but because all the visuals are in your head. That's really intriguing, but of course it's a lot harder to put together because everything has to be exactly in the right place, and I lost it again. Sam went out again. It's touched the window.
It works.
Hello? No, not yet. So I want to talk about my journey on this, where I first started thinking about this. Back in 1975, I had this idea of doing some sort of an interactive Disneyland. And I grew up in Los Angeles, that's where I'm from. I remember watching the black and white opening on TV of Walt Disney showing Disneyland in 1955, and I always had this love relationship with the park, and got to go to it every once in a while. But interestingly, after going on a ride, I usually have this letdown experience where the expectation was always way higher than the actual experience. And the fact that the experience was always the same, it never changed, never really gave me what I was hoping for, because it was essentially set. There was my being there had no contribution to the experience at all. So the idea of like, okay, could you do an interactive Disneyland where not only could you contribute to it, but where it would actually change you in some way, in a good way, and you learn lessons or you become a better person. And so I started thinking, well, how could you do this? Not being a programmer at the time, I thought, well, you could probably do this in 10 years, so I should start. I should start now and start learning programming and do it. And by 1985, we'd be there, right? So where to start? So my wife and I opened the first public access microcomputer center in Marin called Marin Computer Center in 1977. And it was a school that closed down because they didn't have enough students. Great librarian on the left. We started out with 10 computers. My wife Annie was a teacher, so she did a lot of the field trips with kids that came in at birthday parties, rented our computers for like $1.50 an hour. For a lot of people, this is their first experience either seeing or touching a computer up close, because most people didn't have home computers yet. So, and there I am again. So we had this grant that we got mostly for outreach, but part of it was about $5,000 earmarked for something I really wanted to try, which is the first step of my dream, which was a Starship simulation project. And we ended up putting the word out, got maybe a dozen or so really sharp people involved. Maybe once a week we'd get together, brainstorm on it, talk about it, come up with how we imagine it could be. And this concept drawing is from a high school kid, Chris Beatrice. That was his contribution. I don't know if you can't see from back there, but on the thing it says MCC for Marin Computer Center 1979. And the idea was that we had this overall 5,000 square foot space, and part of the space were 2 classrooms, which we weren't using at all. So we thought, well, we could build this dome in the classroom, put these stations in there. You feel like you're inside a ship, and we do this kind of long form entertainment thing where you can go for like 12 hours on a mission, like Star Trek, and we got to the point where we had a bunch of really long scenarios and stories, and we built some scale models of what the interior looked like. We had an actual seat you could sit in with no computers, and then we kind of started realizing that the only thing I'd ever really done was start the computer center. I had no idea how to do an actual project. And I started getting a reality hit of what was going to go in this, considering that at the time the computers we had were mostly alphanumeric, except for Apple IIs. You really couldn't do a whole lot of what we wanted to do. But going back to the concept, we figured, okay, you're in this dome environment. That way we could figure that the dome was a part of any ship we wanted to be a part of, change the scenario, and that would be it. This is also one of Chris's drawings. So that's where my thinking about how we could do this started. But I kind of realized that $5,000 wasn't enough to pull it off, even in 1978 or $79. But where could I go to build this? Fortunately, a couple years after this, one of our members at the computer center told me that Lucasfilm was starting up a new games group. And I quickly got to talk to them and got hired, like one of the first people, I think the first outside person after the manager of the group. The first thing I did was talk to Peter Langston, who was our manager, told him my dream of interactive Disneyland, and he said, yeah, that's really great, but we're going to do home games. So I said, okay, we'll do home games. And when he left and the next guy came in, Steve Arnold, who was our manager for most of the time I was there, told him the same thing. And he actually said, I'd love to do this too, but not yet. So most of the games I worked on had a really strong story aspect to it, as a graphic adventure would. But really, the immersion was more in your head, because you really see these little characters walking around the screen on Commodore 64s and stuff. But the last project I got to do, Steve was true to his word, and he let me work on this project called the Mirage Project, which was a joint venture with Lucasfilm and Hughes Aircraft Hughes Simulation, or Hughes Training. And we actually built a prototype. We designed, our team designed the look of it. The Hughes people designed the collimated mirror, the projection system, the computers that did it. I was in charge of the game design part of it. And this thing is massive. I don't think you can quite tell, but this is probably about 12 to 15 feet tall, 12, 15 feet in diameter. You had to have it be very large because the way the mirror works, with 3 projectors going out, you have a maybe 120 degree field of view inside. Because you're looking out off of the projection off of the mirror, you're focusing at infinity instead of like 3 feet or 5 feet away. So you feel like even though you're not on a motion base, you feel like you're in this huge expansive environment. I think when we first finally rolled it out, I heard feedback from someone who said, someone who worked at Atari said, I love this game, but I think you should turn up the motion base a little bit more. And there's no motion base. It's all visuals that he was seeing. So let me show you this. This is a video that was done around 1994. I had to add the music because without it was flat. I realized that whenever we played the game, we would have a CD looping in the background with Star Wars music. So this was actually based on a Star Wars game that I came up with using $1 million image generators. And flying around these canyons, shooting, dogfights, because we had 4 different stations working together. Each one was actually controlled by a real person. Unfortunately, which one's over? Fortunately, it got shown at IAPA in 1994, I think, 1992. But it was, in a way, a lot of ways, it was before its time. The image generator was like $1 million. The pods, each pod was probably about that much. So 8 pods, that's a lot. This is $92. And they just couldn't get it sold to any theme parks at the time. But it was probably the best game I experienced at the time. We had a Amiga computers, the heads down display for the maps, and there was surround sound, and it was just awesome. So what about Disney? So I got to work on a project in 2007 with my wife, with Annie, our friend Jonathan Ackley, who did the Epcot overlay game, which became a huge hit within the management. Disney said, okay, let's do something like this in every park. Let's do overlay games all over the place. So there's this park called Tokyo Disney Sea, which really doesn't have an analog anywhere else that I know of. Very different than any place else. It's an ocean theme. Everything's around a lagoon, but each area has a different feel to it. The area we worked on was called the Fortress. And you can see it under the volcano there. We show you this little video that I cut together from about 40 minutes of different people's videos from YouTube last night. You can see that the environment is gorgeous. It's very much mist-like in terms of the feel of it, kind of a Renaissance feel. There are staircases that go in all different directions. You easily get lost. Lots of little cubbies and rooms and little experiences you get to try out. So we ended up doing a overlay. Essentially, it turned out to be a treasure hunt. We did have a story. Story starts with Leonardo da Vinci, who tells you that you have to go around and find all these different objects and do this before a certain thing happens, or the volcano is going to blow up, and you have to stop it. And unfortunately, it's all in Japanese, so if you don't speak Japanese or read it, you have a hard time playing the game. There's a pirate ship or outside here that you can go on, so that's also part of the experience. So we got to go into these different areas. And you can take a look at this afterwards. I'll show a picture of it, but here's the map. One of the maps, there's actually 4 different maps, so each experience is about an hour that you can go through and try, kind of like a treasure hunt. And the intent is to take you through all these different locations and find different objects, and then that will take you to the next place. This is like the alchemist's room. This is probably my favorite room. What do you call these? I forgot what you call these. The solar orrery. So Leonardo starts off telling you what your goal is. They have a video and like after a mirror telling you the experience, and you have a map and you want to avoid this from happening. Here's my map actually, and you can see that there's a red spot on the ship and a red spot where it says A, and you have 3 objects, and it tells you to go to this box inside the ship. Find this box that has a picture of a spade on it, looking through the hole, and which object you see will tell you where to go next. You go to that one on this map, so you go to the next space, and each one's kind of like, there's usually 3 different objects that you have to match. So you're welcome to come and look at this afterwards. So that was a blast to work. That was the first, I finally got to work on a interactive Disney experience. It wasn't what I was picturing. Very, very low tech. There were a couple of things, you push buttons and have things happen, but not what I was imagining. The other one, I had nothing to do with this. I just like it because I'm a fan of the Harry Potter movies. Has anyone been to either the LA or the Orlando Universal Park, Wizarding World of Harry Potter? If you're a fan, you gotta go. If you're not a fan, don't bother. The one in Orlando is more than twice as good because it has 2 different sections: a London Diagon and Alley section and Hogsmeade area. And you take the Hogwarts Express between the 2. Actually, a moving train that goes between the 2. This is David Fox again, doing a voiceover because the camera we were using to record ran out of memory. So I will try to recapture what I said the evening that we gave this talk. So here we are in Diagon and Alley at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando. Once you enter, you feel like you're actually there. You're on the movie set, you're in the real place. The only thing that didn't feel especially real was the dragon, which looked great but was not animated, though every once in a while it would breathe fire. So there is a really cool magic wand overlay experience throughout both areas of the Harry Potter parks, the 2 parks. You can buy a wand. I believe it's around $30 or $35 for a non-interactive version, or you can spend about $40 for an interactive version that allows you to cast a spell and make something happen in the storefront in front of you. There are about 25 locations in all across both parks, the Hogsmeade Park and the Diagon and Alley and Nocturne Alley area. You're given a map that shows all the locations. In the ground at each location, there's a brass medallion set that shows you both the spell or the incantation you should use and the motion you should use to move your wand. At the tip of the interactive wands is a glass bead which reflects an infrared light back into a sensor
that is located at the display. And if the sensor sees the proper motion, then the effect will happen. Something will animate. When it worked, it was really fun. Sometimes it would work right away. Sometimes you had to be much more precise in order to get the effect to trigger. If, for example, you moved your wand too broadly, or if you weren't pointing the tip of your wand directly at the infrared beam and sensor, then nothing would happen. Or if it was too small of a motion. So it could be very sensitive. And I think some kids and some adults like myself got frustrated from time to time. They did have wizards there who would help you if you got stuck, but I noticed that often the wizards themselves had trouble making it work. Anyway, it was really fun. I grabbed a video from YouTube with a guy showing you how this works.
Now I'm moving on to number 3, which is going to be the Matelia Jinx under the umbrella sign, which is going to be, of course, right next to the one that I just did. Pretty sure I'm just going to follow diagonally all the way around to complete all of my jinxes and spells.
So what's next? Can all these elements be combined into a single unified experience? Take the long-form immersion that we were trying to create back at the Marine Computer Center in the Starship Simulation Project. Take the element of a theme park overlay. So you already have this amazing park that looks great. It looks better resolution you could ever get in any current tech that we have. And maybe add a simulator pod or two, so you could have a flight experience. Well, it looks like Disney's doing just this. This is from their website for Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser. It's going to be an experience coming, I believe, in 2021 at Walt Disney World. It's a 3-day, 2-night, all-immersive adventure. You basically board a starship, which is disguised on the outside as a hotel. But once you get inside, all the views out the windows are of space or wherever you happen to be. You get training, you have games. The cast are all in costume and I assume help you learn stuff. I think there's an attack by Kylo Ren and stormtroopers, and it sounds really great. I think it's going to have about 100 cabins, and it's situated right across the street from the current Star Wars area. So you can take a shuttle from your orbiting Star Cruiser down to the port and walk around and have a port tour, fly the Millennium Falcon and do all the things you can do there. So I'm pretty excited about this. You can go to their website to find out more information and get on the list so that when it does open, you can be one of the first to do it. Everyone arrives at the same time, and I have no idea if there's like double occupancy rate like you do on cruise ships, but that's really the model. It's like a cruise ship, except the cruise ship is in space. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, you can reach me on Twitter at David B. Fox or through my website, electriceggplant.com.